What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I have a special video for you because I'm here with my full review of the iPhone 13 Pro. I've been using this device for the last 6 months. It's been my phone for all my day-to-day tasks. I've used it to film 90% of my video footage for this YouTube channel, and I've used it for content consumption. Pretty much done everything you could expect on it. So I've got some thoughts. Let's talk about if it's worth one hell of a juicy price tag of $1,000 to $1,500. Okay, let's kick off with the design. Always a good place to begin. Now, this phone, although it's not the same as the 13 Pro Max, is still definitely not small. So we're talking dimensions of 5.78 by 2.82 inches. I'd say if you do have large hands, the 13 Pro will probably still be one-hand friendly because you'll easily be able to reach across the screen to those apps in the opposite corner. But if you have smaller hands, you'll probably need to attach something like a pop socket to the back just to make your grip and reach more comfortable, or resign yourself to the fact that you'll need to use two hands. The shape of the phone has good and bad sides to it. Apple have gone with sharp, square edges, which I think looks fantastic. However, I think they do make the phone less comfortable to hold than previous iterations of the iPhone, which were rounded at the sides. And the lack of comfort is something I really notice when I'm using the phone for a while without a case on it, and my hands start to get sore where the device is pressing up against them. We've still got heavily rounded corners on the phone though, which I'm a big fan of. I think they look really nice and refined. The 13 Pro has the oh so infamous notch at the top. That's not really surprising, iPhones have had them for ages. I'm a very anti-notch guy personally. I wish they could just get rid of it somehow and have all of the stuff on the front, like the selfie camera and the Face ID sensor, underneath the display. Or if that's not possible, then I'd be fine with a hole punch design on the iPhone like a lot of Samsung devices, for example, have. But none of those solutions are on the 13 Pro. Instead, we've got a notch that Apple have advertised as 20% smaller than on the iPhone 12 Pro. Now, admittedly, that does sound like a good improvement. Theoretically, it gives you way more room at the top for information like battery percentage and maybe even other concise, customizable stats like weather conditions, or whatever you want. But unfortunately, Apple haven't done anything with the extra space, so it's purely aesthetic at the moment. Maybe we'll get more on-screen info on the iPhone 14 or whatever it's going to be called later this year. Let's talk about ports and buttons. Now, one of the biggest drawbacks to the 13 Pro is that there is no USB-C charging capability. In 2022, I mean, come on. That is a real shame, given how many USB-C cables everybody has lying around these days, and considering that other Apple devices like the iPad already introduced USB-C a while ago. So instead we have to deal with the Lightning port and just pray that the USB-C comes at some point later, before we're all living in the metaverse and never even seeing a physical phone again. Button layout is pretty standard on the 13 Pro, so on the left you've got your volume buttons and your SIM card holder. There's also a switch for toggling on and off something called silent mode, which really should probably be called vibrate mode because it mutes the phone speakers when it receives notifications, but keeps vibration on. This switch can be super useful, and it's not something that many Android phones have, but it can also be really annoying because if you don't have a case on the phone, then it's really easy to knock and accidentally toggle if you brush your device at the sides. On the right, there's the button for locking and powering up or down the device, and then there's this little thing next to it, which is a cutout for the 5G millimeter wave antenna 2. Basically, it's the hardware that you need to connect to 5G in available locations, which, by the way, are currently pretty limited, but we'll get more of them soon. And finally, on the bottom, there's your Lightning connector and your speakers. Now, the only customizable spec options that come with the 13 Pro are storage, and they come with a pretty massive range in price. So the lowest option is 128 gigabytes, just under $1,000. Then others are 256 gigs, 512, and then 1 terabyte. Personally, I went for the 512 gigabyte option because I film a lot of 4K footage on my phone, but if you're not a video content creator or you don't care about storing loads of video files on your phone, then you could easily get away with 256 gigs. 128 gigabytes feels a little light in 2022, so I don't think you're gonna get much future-proofing there, but still available if you want it. Now, this phone's display is one of its greatest assets, so let's talk about all it has to offer. First of all, this thing is as bright as hell. It's what Apple calls an XDR or Extreme Dynamic Range display with a max brightness of 1200 nits. Now that is piercingly bright. It makes images look clear and easily viewable even in bright light outdoors, and if you're in low light, you'll almost certainly need to turn down the screen brightness or it'll just scorch your retinas. Because the display is also an OLED, it means that every individual pixel can turn off completely, unlike on an LCD display, which can only heavily dim individual pixels. So the OLED panel means that the black parts of the image on the 13 Pro really look completely black, not just dark gray, giving you this rich, infinite contrast ratio between the lightest and the darkest parts of the screen. Here's the bottom line. When you're consuming HDR content on the 13 Pro, images really pop. They look awesome. What makes the display even better is its Super Retina resolution, as Apple call it, which is so crisp. On the 6.1-inch display on the 13 Pro, there are 2532 by 1170 pixels, so that's 460 pixels per inch. That sheer level of pixel density means that no matter how close you look at the screen, it's basically impossible to see any individual pixels. Everything looks so sharp and beautiful. It's true that there are phones available now like the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, which boasts an even higher pixel density of about 500 ppi, but once you go above 450 ppi, you start to get massively diminishing returns. So no matter where you look, you won't get that much more noticeably crisp than on the iPhone 13 Pro. One last great feature of the display is how smooth it is to navigate. If you're scrolling through YouTube videos or web pages, or you're gaming or really doing anything that involves quickly moving graphics, then everything is seamless. And that's because the 13 Pro makes use of a feature called ProMotion, which is Apple's term for their own variable refresh rate technology. The way the tech works is that it adjusts the refresh rate of the display to anything between 10 Hz and 120 Hz, depending on how you're using the phone. That means that the refresh rate stays high when you need smooth image motion and goes low to save battery when there's less going on the screen. If you've previously used a phone with a lower refresh rate like 60 Hz, which is fairly common, then ProMotion on the 13 Pro will feel like a complete game changer. Honestly, once you're used to 120 Hz, you cannot go back. Now, no review of the iPhone 13 Pro would be complete without talking about the camera, so let's get into it. We've got 3 different massive lenses protruding out of the back here. There's a wide angle with 26mm focal length and an f1.5 aperture. There's a 13mm f1.8 ultra wide and a 77mm f1.8 telephoto. The ultra-wide lens is particularly cool. It has a 120-degree field of view, pretty much on par with human eyesight if you factor in peripheral vision, and it also contains a new macro mode for shots as close up as 2 centimeters. For a smartphone, these close-ups are definitely impressive. Also, all the cameras on the phone have night mode, which produces greater image quality in low light, again, giving pretty impressive results. Now, there's one feature on the camera of the 13 Pro worth talking more about, and that is cinematic mode, which is a new feature Apple introduced with this generation of the iPhone. Essentially, this mode automatically focuses on the subject in frame and blurs the rest of the image in order to provide more depth to the shot, and in general, a more immersive picture for the viewer. If you want to learn more about this feature, then I've actually made a video focusing on it in more detail, but here's the essence of it. Cinematic mode on the one hand is great because it produces really high quality images with a nice dynamically shifting bokeh effect, but it is also a serious headache for 2 reasons. First of all, cinematic mode can't film in 4K, it can only go up to 1080p, so you're losing out on a lot of crisp detail there. Secondly, if you want to import, view, and edit cinematic mode videos on a Windows PC, then the process can take forever, and it is way more complicated than it needs to be. You basically have to create an iMovie of the video you've made, then export it onto your phone, and then transfer it to your PC, or your video won't have any of the bokeh effect on it and the files won't be compatible with your editing software like Adobe Premiere Pro, which is what I use. Those are seriously annoying problems, and yeah, if you want to learn more about them, then feel free to check out my other video. But other than that, the camera on the 13 Pro is pretty sweet and it can take some pretty impressive shots. Last of all, it's probably the most impressive feature, which is battery life. This is where that other tech like ProMotion really shows how effective it is. Typically on a single charge, I've found that I've got around 2 days worth of battery life, and during that time I'm streaming videos and playing back audio for several hours each day, as well as doing all the stuff that you would expect, like instant messaging, emailing, task managing, and so on. That's pretty decent, and it's all the more satisfying for me given the fact that my previous phone, which was an iPhone 7 Plus, was dying well before the end of the day repeatedly, even after charging it every single night. Apple advertised that you'll be able to get around 22 hours of video playback, 20 hours of video streaming, and 75 hours of audio playback before needing to charge, and that's definitely in keeping with what I've found so far. Battery life on the 13 Pro is easily one of the best on the smartphone market today. You definitely can't go wrong with it. So there's tons more we could talk about in this review because we've only really scratched the surface of the iPhone 13 Pro. But because this video will be obnoxiously long if I keep going, let's cut to the question that every review is supposed to end with. Should you buy the iPhone 13 Pro, and is it worth its juicy price tag? So the answer I would give is not necessarily. I think Apple have done a fantastic job with this phone, especially with the display, the battery life, and the overall aesthetic and design. So if those features are what really matter to you and you want to drop $1,000 or more on a smartphone, then sure, go for it. You probably won't find much better elsewhere, unless you want to avoid the Apple ecosystem altogether, in which case you probably haven't been watching this video. But if you're thinking of buying this phone because it has a really great camera, maybe you're a content creator or you just want something to take really high quality shots of whatever you're doing, then I'd say the 13 Pro might not be the best option for you. You'd be better off buying a less expensive smartphone, maybe something like the iPhone SE, and picking up a DSLR camera with the extra money you're saving instead, which will give you better photographic quality and therefore be more cost effective. And to be honest, I wish I'd done that, now that I've been using this phone for the last 6 months. So it really depends on your use case, but in all of them, it's still a pretty awesome phone. Leave a like and subscribe if you like this video, and let me know if you agree or disagree with my take on the iPhone 13 Pro. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see my review of my favorite iPad case, click here. And to check out the best productivity enhancement features of Apple devices, click here. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.